Hello, hello, we've set the foundation of our animation, now it's time to continue the job. Here's how it looks so far. Not bad if I say so myself. Let's move on to the tiers. These are 4 layers, so we'll need to convert them into individual smart objects. Please don't create just one smart object, as we need distinct animations for each one. Okay, now to help you better understand what I'm working on, I'll switch to the Move tool and I'll enable Show Transform Controls. This will give you a visual representation on the canvas. Okay, let's expand the first tier. Here, the first frame should be different. The layer should form from the edge of the eye, so we won't create a new point on our timeline just yet. Instead, we'll use Ctrl-T and we'll resize it to 70%, both for the width and the height. Next, I'll move it somewhere next to the eye. I'd say about 20 pixels towards the right and 10 pixels up, but this will vary depending on your project. It may require a bit more or less, but place it as you see fit. You can always place it with the help of your Move tool. I'll also drop its opacity to 0%. Okay, with these changes done, it's time to create new points on the timeline. Click on the Transform timer as well as the opacity one, because that's what we modified. If we'd changed any layer style, we would have used this third one, but that's not the case here. Okay, move to the next frame and increase the opacity to 100%. Mark the change by hitting the timers. So far, the tier hasn't moved, so let's make that happen. Continue to frame 6 and move it slightly down. I'd say about 20 pixels to the left and 20 pixels downwards, but again, this will vary from case to case. Use Ctrl-T and resize it to 90%, but change its angle to -8 degrees. Coming up next is frame 12. Here we'll move it 20 more pixels down and to the left. Reposition it based on your initial placement. Change the size to 70% yet again. As for the angle, -21 will do just fine. Add another opacity point. Move the blue slider 1 frame, this is number 13, and press on both timers. Now change the opacity to 0%. Believe it or not, we've completed our first tier. Press the spacebar and see it in action. This is what you're aiming for. By itself, it doesn't look all that spectacular, but we'll soon do the same to his friends. All the other 3 are created by using the same techniques. I'll speed up the process and I'll mention only the important bits for this second one on the side. So for the left big tier, move it towards the edge of the eye and resize it to 60%. Mark this initial starting point on the timeline. You'll notice that when you're on frame 0, Photoshop doesn't automatically add these points, so you have to click on the timers yourself. Set the opacity to 0%. Move to the next frame and set your opacity to 100%. So from invisible, we're making it visible. Coming up next is the 6th frame, where I'll move the tier 30 pixels down and 10 pixels to the left, like it's going over its cheek. Set the width and height to 80% and change the angle to -4 degrees. The changes should automatically be added on your timeline. For the 16th frame, increase the size back to 100% and change the angle to -13 degrees. Move it down 30 more pixels. On frame 17, we'll drop the opacity to 0% and we'll mark it on the timeline. Okay, those were the essential points, and we're done with the big tier. I'll edit out the part where I create the other 2 from the right side, as I'm sure you want to move forward with our animation. It's the very same process where you take each layer and reposition it between frames, and you constantly swap between 0 and 100% opacity. Okay, through the wonderful magic of editing, we're left with only one thing to animate, the mouth. Here we need to create one single smart object from these layers, so not individual smart objects, but only one. I want to move this shape up and down to simulate laughter, so let's set our starting position by clicking on the timer. Note that if you forgot to move your slider to the beginning of your timeline, right-click your keyframe and delete it. Okay, use Ctrl-T and resize it to 80%. This is our starting point. The mouth should be small at the beginning. Now move to the 6th frame and move it 40 pixels up. Change the size back to 100%. Next, go to frame 12 and click on the Transform timer. Now copy the initial frame's properties and paste them here. Good stuff. This needs to be repeated for frame 18. There you need to copy the 6th frame and paste it. Finally, we've reached the end where we need to set our final frame, number 23. Copy the starting one and paste it. And that's it. Press the spacebar key and check it out. See what it looks like. In case anything's the matter, I've attached a cheat sheet with everything you need to know about each keyframe, so don't stress too much about it, just take it point by point. To save it, use Alt-Control-Shift-S and choose the GIF preset. Here, all the options don't really interest you. Just make sure the Colors drop-down is set to 256. My advice is you focus on the looping options at the bottom right. Here, you don't want it set to once. Instead, change it to forever so you'll have a continuous loop. Save it and check it out. Please note that as of the date of this recording, Adobe has yet to implement this feature into the new Export As command, which is activated through Alt-Control-Shift-W. They said they're working on it, but in the meantime you'll have to use the legacy method. Here's our animated GIF. Thank you so much for watching. Coming up next is your assignment, so stay tuned.